Good afternoon. I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon for our third installment of webinars. The Minority Business Development Agency is tasked with putting on a series of webinars to assist small and minority businesses as they move forward and help them navigate through this difficult time of COVID-19. Today's webinar, Are You Ready for the New Normal?, is designed to give you some tips and best practices on how you and your business, your organization, can navigate through these difficult waters. We've got a lot of good information for you today. We've got some very knowledgeable speakers. And if you, in fact, have any questions, please feel free at any time to enter your questions into the chat box. And at the end of today's webinar, we will address each one of them in the order they were received. So sit back, relax. We've got some great information for you today. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Just so that you know very briefly, the information contained herein today and that we're discussing and that our speakers are presenting is for informational and guidance purposes only. We strongly encourage you to check with your state, county, or municipal officials for any COVID-19 related issues or ordinances that may be in place. And you can also check with your local health departments for any potential exposure information. Thank you. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce our speakers to you today. First, we have Dr. Joseph Lee Pearson. Dr. Lee Pearson is the Associate Dean for Operations and Accreditation in the University of South Carolina's Arnold School of Public Health. He has an extensive background in public health preparedness and has been serving as co-lead for the university's public health planning and response to COVID-19. He holds a doctorate in public health with a focus on practical applications in the community. Our next presenter today is Mr. Antonio Schuler. He is an engineering associate with DESA with over 30 years experience in civil design, estimating, traffic signal design, managing capital improvement projects with private and government entities. He graduated from South Carolina State University, with a BS degree in civil engineering technology. I hope you will give these two gentlemen your full attention as they've got some very valuable information to present to you. Next slide, please. Before we begin, would you mind please taking a brief poll question so we can kind of gauge exactly where our viewers are today? Is it possible to have had COVID-19 and get it again? Yes or no? Great. Thank you so much. And without further ado, I'd like to present to you Dr. Pearson, who will go over some of the information that was received from the polling results. Dr. Pearson?
Thank you, Ms. Jones, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, even virtually, to share information about COVID-19 and to talk about the impact of the pandemic on the business community and how you can operate successfully in this new normal. From the polling question, I see that all of us are learning a lot about this pandemic and about COVID-19 in particular. And if you answered yes to that question, you were correct. Sadly, it is possible to have had COVID-19, to have recovered, and to get the virus again. We have seen documented cases now of that, and so we're mindful that this is an added challenge to the pandemic amidst the challenges that we are all now familiar with through this ongoing pandemic. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit this afternoon about some of the aspects that relate to the key question that's shown at the top of this slide, which is how do we safely navigate these challenging times? And to think a little bit more broadly about navigating that through the lens of a business owner or operator, and to think about how we can adjust to this new normal moving forward and working together. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to join you all this afternoon. The first aspect that I want to cover is just understanding COVID-19 a little bit through the lens of all of our experiences. We have all had our own perspective and our own perceptions around COVID-19, but it's important that we understand some key facts that are not only guiding our current circumstances, but will shape the new normal moving forward. Coronaviruses themselves are not new to our population or to the global community, but COVID-19 is a novel version of the coronavirus. It's called COVID-19 because it was discovered in 2019, and it has certain hallmarks that make it the perfect impetus for a pandemic. One is that it is novel to our population, and there is no inherent immunity in the population at large. But it also transfers very easily from person to person. We have all learned that through the various advisories that we've heard, but that ease of transmission from person to person makes it a key ingredient for a pandemic. What we also know, though, is thankfully the majority of those, the vast majority who get coronavirus or COVID-19 have either mild symptoms or no symptoms at all. And we're grateful for that reality. But the important note is that there are individuals that are at heightened risk for serious illness or significant prolonged illness from COVID-19. And sadly, as we marked this week in our country, for 200,000 individuals who have died as a result of COVID-19, there are serious concerns around loss of life. And so when we think about COVID-19, we have to be grateful for the fact that the majority of individuals have very limited or mild impact from the virus, but there are individuals who are susceptible to significant or serious outcomes. We have learned through the course of the pandemic that certainly individuals of older age are at increased risk, but we also know that individuals with underlying health conditions are at considerable risk. And this is important as we think about minority businesses and the minority community in general, that we know through public health that minority communities are challenged with underlying health disparities. We see increased cases of chronic disease in our friends and neighbors in the minority community. And we are particularly challenged in South Carolina and our neighbors to the north, in North Carolina, with increased numbers of cases of chronic disease. And that creates an underlying concern when we see COVID-19 in our communities, because we know individuals with underlying health conditions are at increased risk. And so, as noted on the slide, it's very important that we respect the health conditions of individuals in our communities, and that we are mindful of the underlying health disparities that are rampant in our communities. It's also important that we think about and define acceptable risk. All of us have had to venture out into a world that feels a little bit scarier now. And I can remember the first time I ventured out to the grocery store back in the early spring, and perhaps you may as well. I felt like I was suiting up for a spacewalk. Now I'm a little bit more comfortable because I understand the protections and the means of ensuring that I'm managing my risk. And so in public health, we use the term acceptable risk. That may sound a little foreign to you, but it's something that all of us can operationalize in our own lives, because we know that we have had to assume a certain degree of risk as we have re-entered society, and we have gotten together with small groups of friends or family, as we have gone to the store or to patronize businesses, or invited individuals into your own business, understanding that all of us are assuming a certain degree of risk, and we have to define for ourselves what is acceptable risk. And part of what influences that is what underlying risk do we have individually? What risk do those that we care about have, and how might we be influencing their risk? And so thinking about that term of acceptable risk is one that helps us to navigate these days of the new normal and operating during a pandemic. It's also important, though, in defining and managing that acceptable risk, that we understand what the proper prevention strategies are. All of us have heard the advisories about ensuring that we are wearing face covering, that we are staying 6 feet apart and practicing good social or physical distancing, and that we're washing our hands regularly, just as our moms always told us that we should. Those are fundamental public health strategies, but they're also fundamental prevention strategies that allow us to protect ourselves and others in the community. And it's important that we think about those in the context of businesses as well, so that we are not just protecting ourselves, but thinking about protecting the customers that come into or patronize a business. I would add to the list of prevention strategies when you think about your business that thorough and frequent environmental cleaning is really a key to solid prevention strategy. Making sure that those high touch, high contact surfaces are cleaned regularly. That not only helps to slow the spread of virus, but it also gives an outward sign to your customers that you're concerned about their health and safety, along with the health and safety of your staff. You'll hear more about that through today's webinar, but I want to underscore the importance of environmental cleaning as a key prevention strategy. So I think as we move to the next slide, we're going to have the opportunity for another poll question. And so I believe as our facilitators bring this up on the screen, you'll see the question: what is the most important prevention strategy to follow? Social distancing, hand washing, face coverings, or is it all of the above? Give you a chance to chime in with your answers, and we'll see where we stand with that. All right, we have 100% correct answers. So all of you get an A, that's wonderful. I will note that the CDC director had a bit of controversy last week in vaulting face coverings to be the best and primary point of prevention. And I certainly don't want to take issue with the CDC director. But I would say from my vantage point, all of the above is the best answer, because there are many ways that we can protect ourselves, and employing all of those is certainly the best strategy. So we want to do everything we can to protect ourselves and others. So as we think about how we manage our risk, we want to also think about how we manage our fear and anxiety. Even for somebody working in public health, this is a concerning time. There are a lot of adjustments that we've had to make in the way we live our lives, the way we interact with those around us, and that creates fear and anxiety. And there are concerns that arise in all of our lives, and we think about that on a regular basis, sometimes every day, maybe even hourly on certain days, about the anxiety and fear that we're navigating. And that is real, and it's important to recognize and respect that. One of the best antidotes to fear and anxiety is to stay informed and to make sure that you are aware of the best ways to protect yourself and others. But I would add a cautionary note that staying informed is good, but don't be too informed. It is very easy to be overcome with information. And everywhere we turn today, there's information about coronavirus and COVID-19, about all of the various impacts related to the pandemic. And some of that information is conflicting. Some of it is hard to interpret or understand at times. And I would just add a cautionary note to make sure that you are informed, but not too informed, so that you give yourself a chance to think about other things as well. But as we look to information that can reassure us, I would ask that we move to the next slide, where I've provided a couple of resources that I think are worthy for us to consider. It's important that when you turn to any source for information, that you are assured that it's a credible source. And by credible, I mean that the information they are sharing has been tested and is based on data and evidence, so that you know you are getting the best possible information. I would also say, as I share with my students, that the best solutions often come from those who are closest to the problem. And so when you think about information, turning to a local source, whether you're in South Carolina or North Carolina, being able to look to those sources that are nearby that have perhaps a more localized perspective on the issues. So I've shown here on the slide two of the best resources in the Carolinas. In North Carolina, the Department of Health and Human Services is serving as the lead for providing COVID-19 information and conducting surveillance on the cases and fatalities that are occurring as a result of COVID-19. Their website is listed here. In South Carolina, it's the Department of Health and Environmental Control that is the lead public health agency in South Carolina and is serving to provide information on all of the COVID surveillance. And so I commend both of these sites to you for your consideration. But I would also draw your attention to some of the similarities and distinctions that exist here. Both states are navigating the same challenges in terms of COVID-19, but as we all know, North Carolina is a larger state and has almost exactly twice the population of South Carolina. But when you look at the cases and fatalities, it's interesting to note that there's not a huge difference there. In South Carolina, we're just a little over 137,000 cases of COVID-19. In North Carolina, a little bit more than 195,000. One would expect there to be a difference there because of the much larger population in North Carolina. But when you look at the fatalities, we are almost the same. South Carolina has just over 3,000 fatalities, and North Carolina has just over 3,200. So we're nearly the same in terms of the number of fatalities, which is difficult to absorb and discern when you think about the fact that North Carolina has twice the population of South Carolina, but we have nearly the same number of fatalities. And a lot of that is due to the underlying health disparities that exist in South Carolina. So it's particularly important in the Palmetto State that we focus on supporting those individuals living with underlying health conditions and that we do everything that we can to protect those who are already challenged by health disparities, particularly in minority communities, and offer as much support as we can to ensure that the best prevention strategies are in place and that we are providing appropriate care and support to any individuals who contract coronavirus. And so with that, I will advance to the next slide. And I listed here a couple of points. One is that something that we already know, that the way that we live our lives and conduct business has changed dramatically as a result of the pandemic. But it's important for us to think about which changes will endure and how will life be different moving forward. So as we move to the next slide and begin to think about the new year ahead. I've never been one to really celebrate New Year's Eve, but I think this year I may, because 2020 has been a particularly challenging year for all of us. And I think in some ways we're all looking forward to turning that page of the calendar to 2021. But before we get there, we have to work our way through the fall, which I think has officially begun now, and to think about what the new year ahead will be like. And so just a few key points to consider. As we move into fall, we also move into flu season. And so we are particularly concerned in public health that we are not only navigating a pandemic with COVID-19 and coronavirus, but that we are also getting ready to see the onset of flu season. So this is my opportunity to encourage you and for you to encourage those you know that anyone who is able to should get their flu vaccine this year, because it's one way of, again, preventing that potential eventuality and allowing you to protect yourselves from one of the threats that we know is on the horizon. And so it's really important that we think about all of the ways in which we can protect ourselves, not just from COVID-19, but from influenza as well. It's also important for us to think about potential second wave of COVID-19. We've all heard throughout this pandemic that typically pandemics come in waves. We have certainly been seeing the effects of this first major wave of COVID-19. And we have all begun to see some improvements in areas where we had really heightened numbers of cases. Things have improved. But we are sadly seeing the signs of a potential second wave. We have more than 30 states right now in the US that are showing increased cases. We have neighborhoods in New York City that are beginning to show spikes in cases where they had seen dramatic improvements. And in Europe, we're seeing cases in the UK, in Germany, Italy, and Spain, where their weekly case totals are now on par with what they saw in the height of the pandemic back in March. And so it's very important that we remind ourselves that we are not out of the woods, that as much as we may want to let our guard down, it's important to be dedicated to those prevention strategies, and that we maintain ongoing prevention protocols, and that we remain hopeful that there will be a vaccine developed. I am not going to offer any pontifications on the timeline for that because there are plenty of people doing that. Let's hope that it is sooner rather than later. I think the best projections put it sometime after the first of the year. Just knowing all that's involved in ensuring that vaccines are safely developed and delivered. It is not something that any of us want to rush, but we will all welcome the news of an available vaccine. I would also note that many of our social norms have changed. We all know that, but some of those are going to remain well into the future, and they may never really return to what we used to define as normal. We've all stopped shaking hands or offering a hug as a greeting. And I think we'll be very cautious to see that return, sadly, because we know that we need to make sure we're protecting ourselves and others. There will be a gradual return to normal. There will be some compromise between this new normal that we now know and what we used to know. But we need to remain hopeful that some of the things that we have learned and achieved during this challenging time, the cooperation and the collaboration, the innovation that's coming through particularly business owners in addressing operations in this new normal are things that we want to hold on to as we move into the new year. And so on that hopeful note, I will turn it back over to our facilitator and be available for any questions towards the end of our time together. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Thank you so much, Dr. Pearson. You've given us a lot of information to think about, a lot of valuable information that I'm sure we can take back and share amongst our family and staff members for those of us who have businesses. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the questions that will be available for you to answer at the end of the webinar today. And ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind, before we bring on our next speaker, Mr. Antonio Schuler, if you would just take a moment to answer this brief poll question. Do you have a plan for re-entry into your business or office? Yes or no? Well, that's about a 50-50. About half of you do and half of you have not yet established a plan for reopening your business. Hopefully, Mr. Schuler, as he comes forward, will have some information for you that you can take back and put into practice. Mr. Schuler, if you would.
Thank you, Secretary Rita, for that introduction. And again, thank you, Dr. Pierce, Dr. Lee, for your presentation. That was very informative. Back to the poll question. I saw half of you had a plan, half of you didn't. Now, what does it take to start a plan or to get back to work? Well, first thing you need to do is make sure you look at your local ordinances and regulations in your town or community, and decide how they may be appropriate into your business, and write down your business plan. Next slide, please. You develop a workplace strategy that's customized for your particular business situation. If you have a lot of face-to-face interaction, then you know masks will be very important. If you have a business where you have the glass canopy like a gas station, you may have your customers have to wear masks, and the one retail person, since they're in a booth, they may not need a mask. But you definitely want to take the necessary precautions to provide all the PPE equipment that your workplace will need. And you want to promote behavior that reduce the spread. You definitely want to encourage your employees to know your plan and share your plan with your employees. Since it's in writing, make sure they're aware that they need to disinfect and clean all high touch surfaces, observe cough etiquette, and reinforce these positive changes, because anytime you make a change, it's not always welcome in the workplace, especially in this stressful time. but you're protecting your business, you're protecting your employees and your clients. Next slide. You do this by establishing a protocol for your business, meaning all of your employees buy into this. Everyone buys into doing their part to minimize the risk of exposure to COVID-19. After you do your assessment, now you can identify what PPE equipment you need. And what I mean by that is personal protection equipment. And you should provide this to your employees at no cost. Masks, protective shields, a face shield, and gloves. Now, depending on your situation, you won't need everything all at once. I'll give you an example. My wife's a school teacher. It's recommended they wear masks, but they also recommend for school teachers to wear a face shield in conjunction with the mask. So that little twist, it may not necessarily be something you would use in a retail setting if all you're going to do is, exchange funds with, let's say, at the register and move forward. But like I say, you customize it. Like I say, you write down your plan and you train them how to use the PPE equipment. Make sure when they do mask up, that it covers their nose, and mouth properly. When you walk through your protocol, you remind them that they should wear their mask in public settings. Use touchless equipment for measuring temperature, the touchless thermometer. And if you should have an employee who's exhibiting signs of being sick or exposed, have your employee get tested. And there's no harm or fear of being tested. I was at first apprehensive, but I went and got tested, and it reassures you that I'm safe and my family is safe. And the test was just a minor inconvenience. Again, you can also provide a questionnaire as a way of re-entry back into your workplace. What do I mean by that? But I call it the exposure questionnaire. An example of this is a list of questions you may give to your employees prior to them coming back to your office or workspace. Have you been on a commercial flight in the last 2 weeks? Have you been in close contact with someone who was diagnosed with COVID-19 in the last 14 days? Have you exhibited 2 or more symptoms? And your checklist goes on, and you record this information. And that way, when they come back to work, you're reassured and they're reassured that the workplace is safe as possible, because you've done your disinfected your high touch areas, you've cleaned all of your surfaces, and you've done the best you can to make sure the workplace is safe for you and your customer. And you have a plan in place. Your plan keeps everybody on the same page. Everyone has the same understanding. We have to wear masks. We have to social distance. And now everyone's heard those terminologies, but when it's reinforced from management, when it's reinforced from the owner, it has a more positive effect to the whole work team. Next slide, please. Wearing masks in common areas, we definitely encourage, from what we know now about COVID-19, to wear masks even in the restroom. We now know that the particles of coronavirus can survive the human digestive system and can be re-aerolized when you flush the toilet. So whenever you flush the toilet, make sure the lid is down before you flush. And since the bathroom is a confined space, don't linger when you have to flush the toilet. Make sure you go ahead and wash your hands and leave the site. And like I say, your PPE is pivotal. Never take it off, even in the restroom, because we now know from the testing that it can re-aerolize. Limit the access to the break room. Some break rooms are huge and they can provide 6 feet distance in between each user. Some breaks are small. That means one person at a time can only be in there. But limit the use of the break room. just make sure that everyone adheres to social distancing guidelines. And use telephone tools and video conferencing tools. Example, you're on Zoom today. Other tools, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, the school use quite a bit of that. And there's Skype, there are others out there, but whatever tool you use, train your team to get comfortable, because this new normal is going to be with us for a while. Train them so that they can build a level of competency and skill with the tool. Meaning, as they use more of these tools, that they don't have an apprehensiveness and would go back to doing old ways of business. Because even now, that protects them and the clients and your customers, showing them that you've embraced a new way, that this change is from the top down. Avoid using tools that are mostly shared in common areas, if at all possible. If you have to use those tools, wipe those areas down. Get your wipes. If you just have one phone that your employees share in common, have your wipes right by that phone and have as a protocol to disinfect that phone, that high touch surface, after each use, whether it be a vehicle. Just because 5 people use the vehicle in a week, make sure each person is responsible for wiping that vehicle, disinfecting that vehicle between each use. Before and after usually is the best protocol we use here in our office. And keep your workstations clean and sanitized, because we're trying to make sure that every person goes home safe, every family member, every extended loved one, they're safe and protected. Because when we're doing the best we can, we have reduced and minimized the spread of this contagion. Next slide. What you do when exposed to COVID-19. This may eventually happen. This is when your plan is bulletproof, so to speak. This is when you've done the work on the front end, and now you've set that process in place to protect you. You act quickly. You of course you limit access to the site. You air that site out. You make sure that you get plenty of fresh air from open doors and windows, and you consider contact tracing information. It doesn't have to be complicated. Name and a method of contact, email or phone number. And while you're doing this, you should let that area that had that infection problem remain totally unoccupied for 24 hours. Why? Because the vapor droplets need to settle on a surface so they can be properly cleaned and disinfected away. Because prior to that 24-hour period, they're still in the air, and you don't want to bring in a cleaning crew or staff and have them be potentially exposed. So again, the 24-hour waiting period is part of your plan. Cleaning and disinfecting your high touch surfaces, again, part of your plan. So in other words, and once your staff know you have a plan for this eventuality or potentiality, that will give them the confidence to work and follow your plan. They'll put on your mask because we have a plan should something come up. That reinforces your customers. They want to do business with you. They see you're serious about protecting them, and you can still provide your product or service. Next slide. And for your customers, definitely use signage. Example, 6-foot spacing. If that's you have an inside facility where they come in and they have to space themselves out and queuing in a line or some other, depending on your business. Some businesses are outside businesses, lawn care, different things like that. If it's a beauty salon, what they tend to do, I know of one business salon owner, they queue all the customers to stay in their cars and come in during their appointments. So that way you don't have anyone queuing inside the building. And if you have 1 or 2 that have children, they separate them in chairs, but everyone is tested and that the temperature is taken with a touchless thermometer. So don't try to be the mask police. wear masks. You can post your sign for the mask. Mask is required, but follow your local ordinances. And like I said, and don't try to be the mask police. You do the best job you can, and that confidence will be in repeat business. Because I'm much more confident going to businesses that I see putting good practical points in the play. And a quick little slide here I have finally is there's a quick bulletin. Sorry, no entry without a mask. Simple to the point. Wash your hands. We've heard Dr. Lee mention that previously. Clean hard surfaces. Avoid crowds. Social distancing. Antiseptic. Use antiseptic. Fresh air in case there's a potential, and avoid hand contact. We know that's the new normal. Lastly, I just would like to thank everyone for being on this webinar, and I would like to see if Chiquita has that last question for us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Schuler. Very, very good information. And before we move into the final phase of the webinar this afternoon, if you wouldn't mind answering our final poll question for the day. Do you use any type of electronic payment application for your business? It looks like the majority of you do, as you should. Next slide, please. As we wrap up today's webinar, we wanted to introduce you to what we think the new normal is going to look like from now until. And the new normal today means a cashless society as well as a touchless society, most of which I'm sure all of you have had some experience with already. Next slide, please. Experian, which is of course the credit monitoring organization, they've been doing a lot of research on this. And just a few points that I'd like to bring up to you is that that Experian has found is that since COVID-19, there has been an 8% increase in the use of mobile wallets and an increase of 6% in the use of retail applications. The largest areas of growth for using digital payment methods are online grocery shopping, which has seen a 7% increase, and believe it or not, ordering food with a 6% increase, because we know that we all love to eat and order out. And next, we have a 50% growth of consumers globally that intend to increase their online activities, be it banking, payments, and/or shopping in the next 12 months. Next slide, please. 2/3 of consumers are staying loyal to the businesses they preferred prior to COVID-19. And I want you to think about that. 2/3 of consumers are staying loyal to the businesses they preferred prior to COVID-19. So for the small and minority businesses that we are dealing with mostly today, this is a way for you to engender continued loyalty, which means that because we are moving into a cashless and a touchless society, it's incumbent upon you to find those tools that will allow you to keep that 2/3 of those individuals that are loyal, meaning that if they've been shopping with you all along, they don't want to go anywhere else, but in order to move forward, you have to be ready to move forward as well. There's a 20% increase in overall online transactions, a 41% increase in grocery shopping, 40% increase in applying for loans online, and as I said before, 22% increase in food or delivery takeout. 50% of consumers expect to increase their online transactions even more so in the next 12 months. Next slide, please. In doing additional research, we found that the fear of handling money contaminated with COVID-19 has spurred the growth of e-commerce, meaning that People are afraid of catching COVID-19, and they are going to patronize those organizations and businesses which have taken steps necessary to ensure their safety. And the Centers for Disease Control, or the CDC, they encourage the use of touchless payment options by retail workers specifically whenever it's available. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but a lot of businesses have done away with using coins. So if you don't have exact change, all you're doing is giving your money away these days if they don't offer coins in return. And lastly, many businesses have gone to a touchless method, meaning online shopping or curbside pickup, which I'm sure you're very familiar with if you shop at Walmart and do curbside pickup. A lot of businesses are offering that to the consumers these days. Next slide, please. Things to consider for mobile payment options. The device and operating system you use, whether it is a tablet or a cell phone or a computer, any applicable transaction fees. Many of the online payment systems do require a transaction fee, although minimal, but if you think about it, if you have millions of people using this particular mobile payment service, any type of transaction fee is going to benefit the company itself. So do your homework and make sure that the transaction fees are not too high. And there are some with no transaction fees. You should accept multiple forms of payment to accommodate your customers. One important factor here is to check encryption and security features for any mobile application system that you decide to utilize. But be sure to use what suits your business. Don't make it overly complicated. One of the things, I'm sure a lot of you may have heard the KISS method, which normally means keep it simple, stupid. But in this case, the KISS method means keep it simple and secure. And you may find that your checkout process should be easier and faster to avoid shopping cart abandonment, which, believe it or not, is about 70%. And you ask, what is shopping cart abandonment? I know I'm guilty of it. Shopping cart abandonment means that you've pulled everything you want, you've got it all in your shopping cart, and then you have to jump through a lot of hoops, dot your I's and cross your T's before your payment is even accepted. And a lot of people, because we have an instantaneous gratification society now, they don't want to wait. So they abandon the cart and leave it there and decide to go elsewhere. Next slide, please. Mobile payments are considered by many experts much more secure than card swiping. So, because the apps today that are used, they have advanced encryption, or what we call tokens, that will mask your account numbers and all of your information while it's being processed. Some applications use facial recognition or fingerprint identification. And just remember, nothing is 100% secure. So please do your due diligence, do your homework, and make sure that you find a payment system that suits your needs. Next slide, please. These are just some examples of electronic payment systems or online payment systems for touchless purposes or cashless purposes. There's, of course, Google Pay. There's Samsung Pay. Everybody's familiar with PayPal or Apple Pay. Even Cash App, of course, as I mentioned. And Zelle. Zelle is one that is quite secure, as it was started by the banking industry. So there were several banks themselves that got together and realized, hey, we're missing out here because everybody else is developing their own electronic payment system. So several banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, BB&T, a lot of these banks got together and went in to create Zelle, which is a highly secure system as well. Next slide, please. And for those of you that use appointments, there are also online appointment systems available. If you have a salon of any type or a barbershop, there are some online appointment systems that will keep track of all your clients, keep track of all the dates and times that they come in. They can do repeat business. So there's an abundance of things that are out there to help you open up your business again and try to get back to quote unquote, the new normal. You just have to take your time, do your due diligence, put the necessary precautions in place to ensure that not only you, but your clients are safe as well. Next slide, please. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us this afternoon and participating in our new normal webinar. If you have any questions, and I hope that you do because the gentlemen here are ready and waiting for any questions that you may have, I would ask that you enter them into the chat box, and we will address each question as it comes one by one. The first question we have is, and I would imagine this would be for you, Dr. Pearson, is how soon do you think we should get an influenza shot?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. I would suggest that now is a good time. And embedded in that question is an understanding that it takes a little while for the flu shot to become effective. And that's usually around 2 weeks for most individuals. And so when you think about getting your flu shot, you don't want to get it so early that it loses its effectiveness before the end of flu season. We know that flu season usually gets underway in earnest in November. And so getting your flu shot anytime between mid-September and the end of October is usually the sweet spot. And since we are right in that, I would say now is a good time to begin thinking about getting your flu shot.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions this afternoon? No? Okay, if not, I want to thank each and every one of you again for participating this afternoon. And please know that for each of you that participated, a copy of this presentation as well as a copy of the sample documents that were referenced will be provided to you via email at the conclusion of today's webinar. I thank you once again for coming and participating with our webinar this afternoon. And I would ask that you take a very brief survey at the conclusion of today's webinar, because your input is extremely valuable to us. We need to know what we're doing right. We need to know what you're interested in. I think we apologize. I have one more question. Well, it was just a thank you, but thank you so much. I appreciate that. We're very glad that you enjoyed today's information. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, I would like to thank you for participating. If you would stay tuned for a brief survey, I would very much appreciate your feedback. And on behalf of the MVDA, on behalf of the USC Public Health Office and DESA Incorporated, we thank you so much. Thank you for participating, and be on the lookout for our next webinar. Have a great afternoon.